Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to the Bisbee Massacre with David Grassé. Thank you to our program sponsor, the Arizona Historical Society, as well as our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. Today and every Saturday at 2 p.m., the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum offers the Stepping Back in Time walking tour with former museum curator Boyd Nickel. During this 1-hour walking tour of the historic district, you'll learn about the mining camp's rich history. Spaces are limited and reservations are recommended. To reserve your space, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. On Saturday, April 13th at 11 a.m., the museum will host the free online program Mine Accidents and Safety at Bisbee, Arizona, with Richard W. Graham IV. Please visit the events section of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum's Facebook page for more information. Okay. Born in Casa Grande, David Grassé is a third-generation Arizonan raised in Tucson. He holds a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in library sciences. Grassé has 3 published books: A Killer is What They Needed, The True Untold Story of Commodore Perry Owens, The Bisbee Massacre, Robbery, Murder, and Retribution in the Arizona Territory, 1883 through 1884, and The True Story of Notorious Arizona Outlaw Augustine Chacón. His 4th book, From the Footlights to the Tenderloin, The Tragic Life of Edna Loftus, is due out in June. He is a member of the Western Writers of America and the Arizona Historical Society. Grassé is employed as a librarian because writing Arizona history does not pay the bills. If you would like to ask questions during the program today, please type your questions in the Q&A chat box. We'll gather those questions to share with our speaker after the presentation. Also, a link to today's recording will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, David. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, actually, so yes, I am talking about the Bisbee Massacre of 1883 today. It's actually, I'm kind of paring this down a little bit. I'm not going to talk really much about the massacre itself, nor the trials of the Bisbee bandits. Kind of going to concentrate on Mr. John Heath, who has, for 100 years plus, always been blamed as the mastermind, accused of being the mastermind of the whole thing. In doing the research, I spent a lot of time in the Historical Society, the Arizona Archive. I was able to access the original court documents. And as I went through it, in fact, when I wrote the first 3 chapters of the book, I have kind of following the legend, really thought that Heath was the mastermind. I got 3 chapters into the book and had to rewrite it. Went back to the beginning and started all over. I really kind of am of the opinion that Heath probably wasn't involved. Okay, what we know, I will say up front, John Heath was not a nice guy. What we know about him is fairly, especially his early life, is fairly sketchy. Born in 1855, probably in Marshall, Texas, to John Heath Sr., a carpenter, and his wife, Sarah. He's an only child, and we know, like I said, know almost probably pretty typical upbringing for a Victorian era kid. The first time he ever makes the news is in 1875 newspapers, and when he marries Virginia, Tennessee, Jenny Farrell. She was actually kind of a upstanding young lady, and it was really a really good marriage. Well, for from his point of view, probably not hers, because 3 years later, Heath gets tried and convicted for the theft of a steer. He was sentenced to 2 years, but absconded to Arkansas, and he was eventually apprehended, but appealed the conviction, and it was overturned. Heath was rearrested on other charges involving theft of stock at the same time, and found not guilty at trial. I kind of wonder what Virginia was thinking about all this at this time. And June of 1881, Heath and a guy named Don Kearns were arrested for a strong-armed robbery of A.K. Johnson on the Long Branch Saloon and Dance Hall in Dallas. Um, a woman identified as Annie Heath, who was neither Heath's wife or his relative, was arrested a few days later for threatening one Bessie Wells to kill Bessie Wells if she testified against Heath in the case. It is probable that Annie was a prostitute and Heath was her pimp. Heath posted bond in the case, but was indicted by the grand jury. However, the case was held over and Heath remained a free man. The Dallas Weekly, was starting to get a reputation by this point in Dallas. And I'm going to read this because it's kind of funny. The Dallas Weekly said of Heath, he is a live, shrewd, quick-witted young man who can get into more trouble and out of it slicker than any man of equal years. He's been charged with so many violations of law, been arrested, imprisoned, bonded, tried, acquitted, etc., that he has achieved a reputation of being either the slyest, smartest rogue extant or the worst used, most unfortunate man living. I kind of have the feeling it was the latter. Anyway, the article was published right after Heath was arrested for allegedly burglarizing the residence of Dr. A.A. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson actually was able to make a positive identification of him, and he was indicted for this too. It's also noted that due to the many accusations against him, he and Jenny had separated. I was not able to find that they divorced, but I'm assuming they did. In June of 1882, Heath gets arrested again with one Georgia Morgan and for running a house of ill repute. However, once again, Lady Luck smiles on John Heath, and in November, the burglary charge was dismissed. And in May of 1883, another of the wrestling charges was dropped. Heath was fair, like they said, he was a fairly shrewd and smart guy. He wasn't, and he had to know his luck wasn't going to hold much longer. And about this time, he moves to the Arizona territory and opens a saloon in Clifton. Um, Clifton was a mining camp. Still, it's kind of the residence area for the Morenci mines now. Not much there. Is one main lane, but he opened the saloon, was doing fairly well. He would later state that this is where he met James Tex Howard, Daniel Big Dan Dowd, Omer Red Sample, William Delaney, and Daniel York Kelly, who would often frequent the saloon. Tex, it turns out actually he knew Tex Howard back in Texas, hence the name Tex. They had ridden together on the Chisholm Trail as cowboys, and so he actually had a long history with Tex Howard. The other ones, Sample, he kind of knew from frequenting the saloon, but he said later he didn't know any of the rest of them all that well. But on November 23rd of that year, he decides to move on to Tombstone, as the trip would entail him riding over 100 miles through Apache country. Heath paid Tex to accompany him. Tex obviously told the other guys, as all four of them were with Heath and Howard the entire way, sometimes riding with them and sometimes just disappearing altogether. They would stop at a ranch and the other four guys would leave. Tex would hang out. And they kept just sort of dogging his trail the entire way. They finally get into Cochise County and they stop at Frank Buckles' ranch. Heath was told Bisbee Tombstone was dead and the Bisbee was the up and coming mining camp. So he changed his mind, decided to travel there, arriving on November 30th. There he was introduced to Nathan W. Waite, and on December 1st, the two men agreed to open a saloon and dance hall together. And for the next 6 days, Heath and Waite worked to get their business up and running. This entailed Waite making trips to Tucson to buy furniture and equipment and furnishings. And Heath was seen around town a few times. And sometime during that period, he runs into Tex. Well, he paid Tex to come across the state or come across the territory with him, and he paid him $7, and he expected Tex was going to go back to Clifton, but Tex was hanging out in town. And he said later he was really surprised to see him because he thought he had left after he paid him. So anyway, on December 8th, the evening of the robbery at Castaneda and Goldwater's mercantile, Heath and Wade have their grand opening. When the gunfire started, Heath asked Wade for his pistol, which was behind the bar, and then positioned himself at the end of the bar, which was really a good defensive position. He also cautioned his patients not to venture out in the street, as the reports were those of Winchesters. Pistol versus Winchester is not really a fair fight. Um, Also, and that would come back to haunt him later, why he didn't rush out there with a pistol to defend everybody. But ironically, on that same day, earlier that day, the state of Texas had dropped all the charges which were pending against Heath in that locale. Everything, the burglary, the strong arm robbery, he basically had a clear record that evening. So immediately after the robbery, and which 4 people were killed, Heath, Wade, and Henry Frost, who was also involved in the saloon business, contacted Deputy Sheriff William Billy Daniels and volunteered to join the posse. Daniels actually sent Heath, Wade, since they were ready to go, Heath, Wade, and Frost out directly while he put together another posse of his own. So the following day, somewhere around Soldier's Hole, Daniel's posse catches up with Heath, Wade, and Frost, and they all join together. Posse continues on. At some point, Heath discovers that the Outlaws has split up. He tells Daniels this. Well, he tells Wade first, and then they both tell Daniels, but Daniels refused to accept this intelligence for whatever reason, and continues doggedly following the same trail. Meanwhile, Heath, Wade, and Frost follow the second trail, which leads into Tombstone. They canvassed around Tombstone once they got there to see if anybody had seen any of the robbers or could identify them. Heath really didn't. They suspected Tex was part of it, but he really didn't know for certain, and he expected if it was Tex, they would have to fight it out. But he said he had known Tex. Later said he'd known Tex for years and didn't know him to be a criminal of any type. I don't know how well he really knew Tex, but anyway, they lose the trail there, and Billy Daniels loses the trail he's following. Heath returns to Bisbee and back to his business. He canvasses around there a little bit, and the following day he's arrested as an accomplice to the robber. Even though the robber later shows that the Outlaws had split up, as proved by the fact that 2 of them were caught in Mexico, 2 of them were caught in Clifton, and 1 was caught. Kelly was caught going back to El Paso. So the trail has split, and they'd actually split up. Daniels, who filed the complaint, still insisted that Heath had purposely misled the posse, and this myth actually survives to this day. If you go to Tombstone and ride the little stagecoach, they give you a brief history when they're showing you the telegraph pole Heath was supposedly lynched from, and they will tell you that he masterminded it and that he tried to lead the posse astray, and that's how they caught him. As I said, the Bisbee bandits, Howard Dowd, Sample Delaney, and Kelly are all caught within a month of the robbery. Pretty amazing piece of detective work, and usually Deputy Daniels gets credit for this, but it was actually his trailer who did it. He was able to follow Dowd and Delaney down into Mexico and found both of them in mining camps down there. They had really tried to. Funny thing is he didn't have jurisdiction down there. So when they found Dowd, they packed him aboard a boxcar without telling anybody and brought him back across the border, which is technically illegal. Because Daniels didn't have jurisdiction to do that. When the Mexican government found out about it, they were incensed. They were like, "You do not do that ever again." So when he went down to get back down there after Delaney, and he finds Delaney. He goes through the requisition process to get Delaney back up into the territory. So once all five of them are caught, they're lodged in jail with Heath. They're all indicted together, and they have a special term of the court because they really want these guys. They didn't want to have to wait the 6 months it was going to be before the court reconvened. Um, but after they were indicted, Heath asked for a separate trial, which was granted. And Heath hired Colonel William Herring as his defense attorney. Um, Sorry, I actually have some things here to show you. Let's see here. So Herring, Heath had actually spent all of his money. There's Mr. Heath. This is actually the only known photograph of him, unfortunately. And there's Billy Daniels. Um, he was later killed by Apache after all this was over. This is William Herring. And Herring was a very well-known attorney. He'd worked in Tombstone. He'd actually he's one of the founders, one of the founding guys in Bisbee. He came to Bisbee very early, and built a castle there and was very involved in the mining community. He also was an attorney, and very well respected. He had defended the Earps after the OK Corral. He defended Billy Claiborne, a lot of the big names that we all know from that area, and he hired him. But unfortunately, actually retained him, but he didn't have any money because he spent all the money on the dance hall. So in lieu of a payment, he gave Herring his saddlebags and this wonderfully engraved pistol that you're looking at right now. You'll notice this kind of interesting. You can see the engraving on it, the mother of pearl handle, but there's this weird little clip right here, and right beneath the cylinder. So you could actually just hang this thing on the side of your belt. It's I've never seen anything like that before. And this is actually the gun that Heath asked Waite to give him when the robbery was happening. It is in the collection of the Arizona Historical Society. So anyway, so Heath gives Herrings his pistol, his saddle, and saddlebags as a retainer, and he actually and he gets a separate trial. The Bisbee bandits were actually tried first. They were indicted. They'd been indicted earlier. They tried them first. It took less than 2 days to find them guilty of murder. A little aside, one of the inanely stupid things these guys did, and they were better cowboys than they were robbers. When they rode into town, all of them were masked except Tex Howard. Tex Howard didn't even bother to wear a mask and everybody saw his face. So, and he had been around town, so everybody kind of knew him. Like they might have known him personally, but they'd seen him around. And so it was and so it was really an open and shut case against these guys. Also, one of the people who was inside the mercantile at the time said that one of the bandits, I think it was Red Sample, his mask shift on his face. They got a really good look at him. Yeah, I mean, these guys they just really messed this up. They didn't change horses when they ran, so they all still have the same horses when they were caught. Yeah, it was really a poorly planned robbery. So I'm not going to go much into, I'm not going into their trial that much. And I am going to just lightly touch on Heath's trial, just due to the fact they're very involved. And the testimony, we're looking at several days worth of testimony from a lot of witnesses. And oddly enough, the witnesses against Heath, most of them, nobody could really connect Heath to the robbery. Yes, he knew all the guys, but that was really the only thing they could do. They could find. The case was really weak. To say the case was weak would be an understatement. like he knew Howard, he knew the others, but none of the prosecution witnesses could prove that Heath had been a conspirator in the robbery. The most damaging testimony came from Frank H. Buckles and Lucien Pardee, but this was like there was lots of inconsistencies when you read it. Inconsistencies, contradictions. They say one thing, and then when a cross-examination, they say something completely else. And they never really. Heath was with the others at both Buckles and Pardee's ranch, but there's no indication that they were planning anything. And it wasn't until later that that these guys came forth with these stories. Um, Deputy Daniels actually testified against Heath as well, saying that he was still saying that he tried to mislead the posse, even though it had proven by where they were caught that he had not. Um, Basically, the prosecution didn't have a case against him. They needed a ringer. And Deputy Attorney James S. Robinson, I believe I have a picture of him. Oh, there's Heath Saddle today, which is also in the Historical Society. This is probably a shot of the men who tried him. This shot was taken in 1884. It is part of the Historical Society collection. And center up behind the bench is Penny. You can see Marcus Aurelius Smith over there on the right with the big burly mustache. Well, I guess they all have big burly mustaches. And so this is actually the officers of the court. Marcus Aurelius Smith, who's the third one in or fourth one in from the right. He was the prosecutor in this. And so this was actually probably taken during or right after the trial, because these people were never ever together again. Smith would end up becoming the congressional delegate to Congress for the territory. And okay. And actually, Mr. Robinson's in here as well. I believe this is him over here with the arrow on him. Anyway, District Attorney Robinson needed a ringer. He needed somebody to give evidence that would condemn Heath, and he found one in a guy named Sergeant Lemuel D. Lawrence, who was under an indictment for murder. He'd killed another soldier in Wilcox, and he'd been sharing a cell block with Heath and the others. He called him to the stand. Lawrence testified he heard Heath and the others discussing the robbery and implicated Heath in the conspiracy. At one point, he alleged that Heath had wanted to kill Pardee because if Pardee said what he knew, they would all hang. It's basically, when you read the examination and cross-examination of Lawrence, it's the same thing. A lot of contradictions, a lot of inconsistencies, and it's pretty probable that he cut a deal with Robinson. In fact, when he came to trial a month later, Lawrence was represented by Robinson. He was tried in front of Judge Penny, and he was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. And if you read the articles about it, he pretty much murdered the guy that he killed in Wilcox. But he gets convicted of manslaughter, and Judge Penny gives him 18 months, which is the minimum allowed by law. Oddly enough, as an aside, Lawrence still thought that was unfair and appealed it. He did the 18 months, but yeah, that's gratitude for you. So the defense, when it came to the defense, Mr. Herring, let me see, get rid of this here, stop share. Mr. Herring called a number of witnesses, among Nathan Waite, Heath's partner, testified to Heath's difficulties with Daniels out on the thing, and implied that Daniels had lied to implicate Heath. Henry Frost said exactly the same thing. Probably one of the biggest mistakes that Herring made was Heath had brought a woman named Emma Mortimer with him to to Tombstone, and she admitted on the that she was ran a boarding house and was a prostitute. Said she was part of the half world. She testified to the fact that Heath was in town most of the time. She never saw him meet with these guys, but unfortunately, because of her status, it was probably not very helpful to Heath. Rather than make him look innocent, it made him look like a pimp and part of that half world that she represented, and which of course, and we're looking at and they're testifying before a jury of upstanding white men who kind of were like, oh, okay, yeah, we see what kind of guy he is. So yeah, it's really probable that was a really big mistake on Herring's part. Let's see. And so anyway, um, um, prior to the third day of the trial, Howard and the others were called. Actually, all the Bisbee bandits were called as defense witnesses on the second day. Um, to a man, every one of them stated that Heath was not involved. Um, they, the interesting thing about this is at this point they've all been convicted. They have nothing to lose. They know they're either going to be life in prison or they're going to be hanged, and they're probably pretty sure they're going to be hanged. So by testifying to Heath's involvement, saying no, he wasn't involved, and really they had nothing to lose by doing so. And had he been involved, they would have had nothing to lose by saying he was. So um, they also stated they had no conversations in the cell block about the robbery and the murders, and they refuted all the assertions that had been made by Sergeant Lawrence. So really, they kind of absolve Heath of everything. Heath did take the stand in his own defense. He testified about his journey from Clifton to Bisbee, his acquaintance with the other men. He said he had known Tex in Texas, and he knew Sample from Clifton, but he didn't really know the other three. In fact, he hadn't really met them until they started the journey. He talked about meeting Waite, buying and furnishing the saloons, his actions on the night of the robbery, and the disagreement with Daniels about the split on the trail. He also addressed Lawrence's testimony and said none of it was true. He's basically what he says during his cross-examination, does not really differ much from what he told him in the preliminary examination before he was charged. It's almost verbatim. And you really get the feeling that he doesn't change his story. He's consistent all the way through, unlike the witnesses against him. It's the more like I said, when you read the testimony, it really becomes obvious that he really just came to Bisbee to start a dance hall. That was his whole. And also he really, if you look, yes, he was a fairly bad man. He had, but the closest he ever got to anything violent was the strong-armed robbery he had done in Texas, and which he had help with two other guys with. So that armed robbery was probably well out. He was a criminal to a point, but I think armed robbery was outside of his scope of criminality. But anyway, so on the afternoon of February 19th, Howard, Dowd, Sample, Delaney, and Kelly are sentenced to death by Judge Pinney. After the closing arguments in Heath's case were heard, right afterwards, actually continued. Colonel Herring gave a 4-hour presentation that basically Penny had to cut him off the day before and resume it the next day. The newspaper said it was very forceful and very eloquent. Herring was really known for that. He was, and lawyers back then, they so I have unfortunately his his presentation is no longer extant, but I have read some of the other ones. These guys could be verbose. I mean, they could go on for hours and hours and hours. Hate to be a jury member in one of those hardwood seats during one of these. But anyway, so after bandits are sentenced to death by Penny, closing arguments in Heath's case were heard, and the jury was sequestered. It was expected that they would come right back as they had in the bandits case, with a verdict of guilty. This is what everyone assumed would happen. However, they were out about 5 hours before returning, and they took numerous votes and they could not agree. Um, uh, so what they did, they decided, basically the jury split 6-6. 6 wanted to acquit him and 6 wanted to convict him of first degree murder. So they decided that they would, because they all didn't, they didn't want to have to retry the case. And I really think that the six who held out for Heath were really didn't want to sentence him to die, when they weren't really sure he was involved. And so 6 of the jurors thought he was guilty, 6 thought to acquit him. They came up with a compromise verdict. Rather than convict him of murder in the first degree, they convicted him of murder in the second degree. This actually held, this was not a this meant they could not impose a death sentence on him. And they probably knew that if they did this, Herring would immediately turn around and ask for a new trial and appeal the verdict, which is exactly what happened. Herring filed papers at the next meeting of the court, asking for arrest of judgment and a new trial. They, basically the jury probably just didn't want to have to decide Heath's ultimate fate, but in fact, they pretty much sealed it. So on February 21st, Judge Penny, the court reconvenes. Herring introduces his motion for a new trial. Penny, of course, denies it, which is standard procedure, which meant that automatically would send it to the Supreme Court in the territory. And Penny then turned around. Heath was told to stand, and he pronounced a sentence on him, which would be life imprisonment, the maximum for second-degree murder. Of course, Heath was probably fairly relieved. Probably thought, okay, I'm going to get another child. This is going to be okay. However, that would never happen. On February 22nd, early in the morning, 100 to 200 men arrived in Tombstone. Some came from the mines there, some came from Bisbee. They went to the Tombstone courthouse. The jail at that time was on the first floor of the courthouse. The county sheriff actually tried to stop them at one point, and they threw him over a staircase, or a stair banister outside, and basically told them, just keep out of the way. About 8 or 9 of them went inside. They went in, made the jailer unlock the cells. There was some argument for a moment as to whether they were going to hang all of them, but cooler heads prevailed, and they go, these guys are already going to die. All we want is Heath. So they drag Heath out of his cell, tie a rope around him. He's in his stocking feet, and because he was relaxing in his cell, and he's wearing a pair of trousers and an undershirt, and that's pretty much it. They basically put a rope around him and run him down the road to underneath the telegraph pole. According to legend, they had a young boy shimmy up the pole, put a rope over the crossbeam, and Heath is made to made to stand underneath it. One of the newspapers said the coolest head in the whole place during this incident was Heath. They said he was like completely unflustered by this. He was quoted as saying, um, in fact, they said he made a most wonderful show of bravery, and he was quoted as saying, "Boys, you're hanging an innocent man, and you'll find out this before those other men are hung." They then Heath then is there's some controversy about this. Some say Heath pulled out a silk handkerchief and tied it around his own eyes. Some say they did it for him. They uh, roped his legs and his feet down, and then they pretty much put the noose around his neck, asked him if he was ready. He said yes, and they dragged him up. It's really okay. There's a big difference between a lynching and a judicial hanging. I'm not going to go into real gory details, but judicial hanging is what the other five would endure. Basically, you're dropped through a trap and it breaks your neck. You go into immediate shock and you're pretty much out of it in seconds. Being lynched, dragged up like that, just basically rips apart everything inside the neck. It's a gruesome way to die, and that's why they tie his feet and his legs together, because if not, he just hangs up there and flops. It probably took him a couple minutes before he lost consciousness and went into shock. It was, yeah, like I said, it's not the way anybody would want to die. um, it did happen to be George Washington's birthday, and they put a sign beneath him and saying, you know, saying George, saying Heath murderer, and that the fact he was hanged on George Washington's birthday. There's also the very famous photo taken by Cornelius Fly of the hanging. Yeah, I think they had it up here a second ago. And Cornelius Fly actually made lots of copies of that. He made a small fortune um, sharing that around. It's and copies of it now are actually worth quite a bit. But yeah, this famous photo with the people standing underneath him, you can actually see, if you look in the background, you can see there's some actually young men, some kids back there. And this is the only known photo of John Heath. There is one, there's one out there now. Alleged people are alleging it's him. It's a guy with a big black mustache, but that's, this is the only confirmed photograph. Let's see. So he hangs out there for about an hour. They've cut him down, and Dr. George Goodfellow, who was a prominent physician, examined the body. It was typical standard procedure after hanging that or any violent death to call together a coroner's jury. The coroner's jury basically examined the body and decided whether charges need to be, how the person died, and whether charges need to be pressed against anybody. They hear testimony, et cetera, et cetera. Well, and really sadly, Emma Mortimer actually attended the coroner's jury. She gave testimony during it. Um, so Goodfellow examines the body and afterwards concluded, and this is one of those morbid kind of things that comes, gallows humor, forgive the pun, said that Heath had come to his death by, quote, emphysema, which might have been caused by strangulation, self-inflicted or otherwise, unquote. And, Emma Mortimer's sitting there listening to this, she just probably was like, oh my God, we don't know what happens to her. She literally disappears. This is the only mention of her I could find anywhere, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico. But then again, she was of the demi-monde. Nobody would have really paid much attention to her unless she got in trouble. So she kind of disappears from the scene after that. Howard Dowden Sample and Delaney Kelly are all legally hanged on March 28th, 1884. Um, there's a amusing story, and I think I have time to share it real quick. While they were incarcerated in jail, incarcerated waiting to be hanged, John Sullivan, the world champion boxer, was doing a tour of the United States, and he came through Arizona and gave a performance in Tombstone. And I call it a performance because he basically had a couple other boxers and he just beat them up. It was more of a show than an actual boxing match. But anyway, he went to visit the bandits, and kind of guess that was the thing then, celebrity visits to prisoners. And he meets Tex Howard, um, and he actually comments on the fact that Tex Howard is a really good looking guy. Unfortunately, we don't have any pictures of Tex to confirm this, but and of course, Sullivan's face is pretty messed up from being beat on many times. And Tex turns to him and quips, he goes, "I'd take that mug if I could. I'd trade your mug for mine if I could get out of this hanging." um, yeah, they kind of had some fun with it. But yeah, and and Tex also made a joke about he pointed out to the sheriff, and he says, "See that man over there? You think you're tough? He's going to take out 5 of us in one blow." And so yeah, just so but yeah, so on the 28th, 1884, on a 5-man scaffold, they hanged all of the Bisbee bandits all at once. It they unfortunately the scaffold was used again for the Halderman brothers. There was only 2 of them, and then sometime in the 1920s or 1930s, they found it in the basement and used it for firewood. So unfortunately, the one that's currently standing in Tucson is just a reproduction, but it was a 5-man gallows. It was the largest hanging in the Arizona territory. Um, uh, okay, so what happens to Heath? Or Heath's body, I should say. Today there is a marker that you will find in Tombstone's Boot Hill Cemetery for John Heath. Um, it's a cenotaph. He's not actually interred there. His father came and got his body and took it back to Terrell, Texas, and it was buried in an unmarked grave in the family plot. The remains of Howard, Dowd, Sample, Delaney, and Kelly are buried in Boot Hill, but no one actually knows where. During the first El Dorado days, John Clum visited the cemetery. His wife was buried there, and this is, I believe, late 1920s, early 1930s. He went there to find the grave of his wife, and he said the entire hill was covered with sagebrush. Almost all the markers were gone. He couldn't find the grave of his wife, and so today, when you walk through there and you see the mounds and the gravestones, that's really for the tourists. They know those guys are up there somewhere, but nobody really knows where, and they've never gone through with equipment to try to locate it. It's kind of a tourist trap. And the markers are for the tourists. Okay, so finish up really quick. Why does the myth of Heath's involvement in the Bisbee Massacre persist? My belief is because if Heath was innocent of the crime, by lynching him, that made all the citizens who participated in it murderers. And and they didn't want to see themselves as that. So when there was a couple voices of dissent. Lewis Hughes, who ran the Arizona Daily Star, took all of them to task for it, and he's like, "What if you're wrong? What if you were wrong? You've just murdered an innocent man," and he was just told to shut up, basically, by all the other newspaper editors, because it wasn't the preferred narrative for and it's still not for the people of the time or for their descendants. It's easier just to say, yeah, Heath was guilty, because if not, you would have to admit that all the other people were murderers. And so I think that's the reason it really persists. We don't like to think they don't like to think that they actually did something wrong. So I think that's pretty much it. I'm sorry the slideshow didn't work out so well. There were actually a couple more pictures. I wanted to show you a picture of Robinson, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, technical difficulties. I guess questions?
Thank you so much.
Any?
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. And we do have questions. The first is from Camilla, who resides in Ireland. Um, she is actually a descendant of the miner Thomas Higgins, and he was up at the mine digging away at this time. And Thomas did make a comment in a letter home that every man at the time was a walking arsenal.
Yeah.
Um, she does have a question. She was wondering what the size and socio-economic status of Bisbee was in 1883.
Bisbee had actually, Bisbee was actually kind of, let's see, um, it was literally right after this. Bisbee really changed after the massacre, and there was two. If I recall the story correctly, there was two different mining companies who were following the same vein, this vein of copper, and they discovered right before the massacre that it was just one big vein, and they thought that they were going to end up in court with this really big fight on their hands, both of them trying to claim ownership. Um, it turned out that one of the groups was more than happy to sell to the other group, and they did. And this really becomes the basis for the Copper Queen mine. Is this huge vein of copper they find there, and of course Phelps Dodge eventually comes in and buys everything, and pretty much turns Bisbee, if not literally into a company town for all intents and purposes. Really everything kind of had to be approved by by Phelps Dodge, and because they were really the backbone of the community, and so by 1884, they come to the agreement, and Phelps Dodge, I forget what year Phelps Dodge actually takes it over, but yeah, but they also was really, they didn't want to be Tombstone. Of course, it's a little different between Tombstone and Bisbee, being that Tombstone was a silver camp and Bisbee was a copper camp. Silver mining, you can actually go out, be a lone prospector, and actually make some money. Copper requires um, a lot more machinery, a lot more planning, a lot more men, and you can't really get rich off copper mining unless you have all that. You know, copper's never been really, while it has worth, it's not like silver or gold. So it's a yeah. So by the time 1884 comes around, 1884, they really don't want to be Tombstone, and they go out of their way not to be. They don't want all the gunfights, they don't want the feuds, and they really crack down on it. They end up, they move the red light district up to Brewery Gulch, and the officers are really adamant. The officers they hire are really adamant that they are not going to, deal with any of these old West shenanigans. So, and they don't answer the question, I hope.
Yeah. And the next question is, what street was the saloon and dance hall? Heath's Saloon and Dance Hall. Then there's a second question regarding the dance hall too.
Okay, it was actually right on Main Street. And as far as I have a map. There's a map of it that I included in the book. And the dance hall was located approximately across from where the hotel is right now. Not the Copper Queen, but down the road a little bit. I forget what the hotel down there is called. Is the Grand Hotel, I think, and it would have been right across the street from that. On the map, I show where it is, and I also noted what now stands there because none of those buildings exist anymore.
The next question was, do you think he was planning to open a bordello if he had survived? Or was dance hall code for bordello?
Pretty much the dance hall was a bordello. The night they opened, there was gambling, there was dancing, but most of the girls who worked in dance halls supplemented their income as prostitutes. So it would have been a brothel. But yeah, you know, but then again, a lot of them didn't. It's a kind of one of those gray areas. It was assumed that a lot of those girls were also working as prostitutes, and Emma Mortimer admitted she was. But that doesn't mean all of them did. So, I mean, those girls can make, in fact, actually, a friend of mine, Santee, who runs the Arizona Ghostwriters, just did a video of this, talking about this today. And a girl in a dance hall could make up to $17 an hour, or $17 a night or week. No, $17 a week, $17. Oh God, I don't remember. But actually, when the average pay of a minor was about $4, and so yeah, it was a real lucrative business, even if you didn't weren't a prostitute. And these men would come in, and they would pay good money to sit 15 minutes or dance with a girl for 15 minutes, and that's usually about all they got. And of course, women encouraged them to buy drinks, and they would get a cut of the drinks too. So yeah, a dance hall was very profitable, even if it was just that.
So in that context, do you think this was the reason the locals wanted to get rid of Heath because of the bordello?
Um, Not really. They probably had a couple more in town. Brothels and bordellos were fairly commonplace in mining camps, especially with a lot when the male population out so vastly outnumbered the women, that it was a you know it would these mining camps really attracted prostitutes up until they start to, like, it's not until the early 1900s that Bisbee starts closing down the dance halls, banning women from saloons and stuff like that. So up until like the late 1890s, from its founding all the way into 1890s, brothels were they were frowned upon. They were segregated to certain areas of town, but they were considered a necessary evil, or it's so it's really interesting how these local societies worked around brothels. But yeah, they no, I don't think, I think it was just the fact that he knew those guys. And unfortunately, that was enough for these people. These people were really angry. They killed 4 people, including a woman, and and basically they shot them down in cold blood. And um, they wanted revenge. And since Heath happened to know these guys, he'd been seen with them, and they just assumed he was guilty.
We also have someone, Jennifer, who has a family connection to Delaney. And she was curious if you know of any pictures of Delaney and can you recommend where to search for information about him?
Okay, this is interesting. When I was writing the book, when Delaney is captured in Mexico, um, they uh, Billy Daniels, or actually the officers, and one Billy Daniels, forget who the other one was, had a photograph of him. And they had got it from one of the other bandits. Not sure who, they never said. And they said, "Are you Delaney?" And they said, he's like, "No, no, no." I go, "Is this you?" And they showed him the photograph. So yes, there is a photograph of Delaney out there, or it was a photograph of Delaney out there somewhere. What I looked for it everywhere. I unfortunately, Tombs nobody in Tombstone knew where it was. The Arizona Historical Society did not have a copy. The State Archive did not have a copy. Whether it got destroyed, I have no idea, but there was at least one photograph of Delaney out there.
And do you know of any well-known Bisbeeites participated in the lynching?
Um, as a as they nobody nobody came out and said anything. Nobody admitted to it. And as Goodfellas said, it was, strangulation, self-inflicted or otherwise. And that's about all they got of it. Except for the people we can see in the picture, nobody knows who did it.
And then I have a bit of a question too.
Okay.
I researched the massacre in college. I did a paper on it in college, and I had the hardest time trying to find newspaper coverage of the trial of the other men. There seemed to be a big gap. Were you able to find some of that newspaper coverage?
Yeah, actually, I was able to find some articles about it. Um, Tombstone talked about it. In fact, um, a lot of them did cover the trial, but there are gaps in there. Unfortunately, some of it's due to literally lost newspapers. Um, I ran into that. They didn't have, like Tombstone, I think was a weekly. So they just kind of they covered the trial, but they didn't really get into the testimony. I think the Bisbee Review was actually doing it, but like there's one of the main um, one of the dates is missing completely. Um, most of the information I got, I did put in what I could in the book from the newspapers, but for the most part, most of the testimony I quoted came right from the trial documents.
Well, David, thank you so much for a fascinating presentation and helping us learn more about John Heath, this kind of infamous character in Bisbee's history. We really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's just like I said, I don't think Heath was a nice guy, but I don't think he deserved what he got.
Um, and I wanted to tell all of our Zoom registrants we will be sending out a email later today with a link to the recording of this program. In the event you've missed a portion or all of the program, you'll receive that. We'll also have a link to where you can purchase the book from Bisbee Books and Music, one of our good
Right.
friends and supporters that is just across the street from the museum. Again, thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you all again on April 13th for our next online program. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you, Annie.